So first, I'd like to start by just asking our panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll go from there.
Cool. Hey, I'm Victor. I'm the head of engineering at Indiegogo. Excited to be here.
Hello, I'm Austin Geidt. I'm head of expansion at Uber, well, the city expansion, and I was also fourth employee at Uber. So happy to be here. Thanks for having us.
Hi, I'm Julie. I'm on the growth team at Waze and overseeing PR growth and business development for new countries.
Great. So I just want to start by asking each of you to talk really briefly about what your definition of the sharing economy is. Like, how do you think about it? This is a term that's kind of new. Is old stuff, like, is eBay the sharing economy? Is it not? How do you think about the sharing economy? Feel free to start.
Sure. I mean, to me, it's pretty much, it's kind of the Indiegogo vision. To me, the sharing economy, the biggest part of it is sharing of ideas, sharing of innovation. You know, everybody has a passion. Everybody has something they care about. For example, you know, I'm a musician on the side. I make music. I also care about technology. A lot of people care about, you know, nonprofit causes, arts, whatever it is. And everybody wants to change the world in whatever area they're passionate about. But historically, very, very few folks have access to resources to make the ideas a reality. You know, you have to go talk to VCs, and very few of us are lucky enough to even, you know, be able to meet a VC in the world. So there is a little bit of this gatekeeper effect that happens. And you know, what we are doing at Indiegogo is kind of democratization of access to capital. It's an open platform. You have an idea, you put it up online, and let the world, the market, kind of look at it and decide if it's worth a shot, if it's worth pursuing, and you get real validation of the idea. You get real validation of you know, potential of it, and essentially the whole world kind of acts as a little bit of a VC for your idea, if you will. So it's actually, to me, it's interesting. The previous session was about wearables, and that's really exciting. If you do something like, you know, just Google Indiegogo wearables 2012, you see how many projects like a couple years ago were like early ideas in the wearable space, and I think that's, you know, that's what overall changes the world.
So you guys think about it a lot in terms of participation. It's access.
Yes.
Okay. How do you guys look at it at Uber?
So I don't know that we look at it under the lens of sharing economy that much. Yeah. I think we look at it as how do we really optimize underutilized resources?
Yeah. Do you think of it as a marketplace more?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's why, I mean, the irony of talking about the sharing economy is I think ours is what's underutilized, how do we make that more efficient? And it you know, it
is
could
it the selling
kind of fall
economy?
under this. Is it the what?
The selling economy, the utilization economy?
You know, whatever you want to call it.
Well, okay.
Yeah, I just think you have a lot of institutions out there that do it this one way, but if you really look at what's the most efficient way to optimize this, and then you start looking at a pool of different resources, and then you also, so there's the sharing economy or using underutilized resources, but then there's also this kind of, that also falls into the on-demand piece as well, right? Where you can get something, you have all these extra resources to take cars, right? Before, now that we can do kind of this peer-to-peer, you have unlimited cars, not unlimited, but, and then you also suddenly can get it instantaneously. So I think call it the on-demand economy, call it the sharing economy, call it just optimizing whatever it is. I think it works.
Yeah, let's bookmark the on-demand component because I think that's really interesting and circle back to it. I think in some regards, right, we're talking about people buying and selling. Waze may be the most aptly described as actual sharing, right?
I think so, yeah. It's, you know, it's inspiring and it makes us excited to keep working on the product. In our case, as you noted, we're not selling anything. Waze made a very conscious decision not to sell our data because we didn't want to become a B2B company. We wanted to stay B2C. And so for us, we're sharing information in two different ways. Really, on the front end of the app, obviously, we're sharing traffic information. And our drivers, which is, you know, any consumer who downloads the app, they're empowered to share information about, you know, traffic, accidents, road closures, et cetera. But where it really gets interesting is that we have a community of 200,000 map editors on the back end who do this for free, and they volunteer to edit the maps, fix issues that are reported by drivers. And that happens because we've created this map editing software that anyone can use, anyone can register. And so it really is not only sharing information about what's happening on the roads, but we're enabling people to share this map editing technology all over the world, which then kind of goes back to the idea of it being a democracy where everybody deserves to have a map that's accurate in their neighborhood. And in a lot of ways, Waze is the only way they can do that. And so it's our responsibility to share that technology with them.
So it seems like that hits again on this theme of participation,
right,
and empowering people to participate and create or contribute. Great. So, we're at a mobile conference. I want to circle back to this concept of like on-demand and mobile and so on. I think on-demand is probably the most obvious example of what's possible in mobile that wasn't possible when you were sitting behind a laptop or a computer. But how do you guys think about the impact of mobile and what's different now that everybody's carrying around a computer? I'd be curious to hear that, how you think about that at Indiegogo, where maybe it's a little bit less obvious.
Sure. No, I think it's actually pretty prominent, the impact of mobile. I think that mobile brings a sense of immediacy, of interaction. Today's users are, in a way, they're fickle. They are distracted by many different things, and having the ability to focus on something, I think, is really critical. I'll give you a concrete example. Let's say you are a startup entrepreneur traveling in the morning to meet with 500 startups in an Uber, right? And last night there was a storm, and there is a tree that fell on the road, and you're stuck behind the tree. And while your driver is using Waze to find an alternate route, and that other drivers know that, hey, there's a tree, don't go here, you want to do something about the tree. Traditionally, what do you do? Well, maybe you write down a note for yourself, and then in the next few weeks, when in your copious free time as a startup entrepreneur, if you actually happen to remember about your note, actually have the time and maybe sit down and do something about, when you are done procrastinating about it, that conversion rate, if you will, is very, very low. In a mobile world, in the world of immediacy, you bust out your phone right there and you snap a picture of a fallen tree right then and there in the Indiegogo app, and you say, hey, I'm going to start a community kind of disaster relief campaign. There's a bunch of trees on the road, and we should clear these trees. We should also check the other trees that are still standing to make sure they're safe, they don't fall on other cars tomorrow. And you just spend 3 minutes on your mobile device, and you just made a community better. You just started something that's impactful, and it was very low investment for you. And because of this sense of immediacy, you just did it, and kind of GTT, move on.
I'm curious, as you guys look at phones, I mean, obviously you're using GPS very heavily, very real time. Do you sort of start from the perspective of this is just a little computer, or do you start saying, hey, there are all these sensors, what can we do, and what can we do with what's in this thing that's not in the desktop?
Sure. I mean, for Waze, obviously, if we weren't using the GPS and the sensors within the phone, we wouldn't have a product. So we start there, but I mean, I think we're a mobile-first company. A lot of consumers or users don't even know that we have the website that you can edit the map, and that's totally fine with us. I think, we're aware that we have a very small amount of real estate on that screen, and so it dictates all of our decisions because we want the driver to be safe. We want them to be able to get their navigation. That's the most important thing. And we have, layered in things like an ad platform, which can take a look at where you are and where you're driving, and then add relevant offers that could be good for you. So if you're on your way to work and you've saved that address, we'll then give you a discount for the local coffee place around the corner. So being aware of that context plus proximity is super important to us. But at the end of the day, if you clutter the screen with too much, all the goodies and the assets and everything, then it completely ruins the experience. So we're very aware of that, juxtaposition.
And I mean, that's an interesting point, right? We talk a lot at 500 about, what's going on in Asia and what's going on here, and they seem to be going completely different directions in terms of simplicity, right? The common wisdom here is split out apps, be simpler, do one thing, be a button. And in Asia, it's like, let's put everything inside of WeChat, right? Like WeChat can do everything. How do you guys talk internally about this tension there, doing more versus being better for individual tasks?
I mean, for us, we all use the product, and so the minute that map gets cluttered, you don't want to use it anymore. So it's actually pretty simple. I think that we're working on continuing to simplify the app and making it as easy as possible for you to drive hands-free, for you to be able to report an accident by voice, and those are things that you can do already. But whatever we can do, to sort of implement our own rules internally, so we keep the user first, is what we'll continue to do.
Mm-hmm. And this is a question for any of you. What do you see on the horizon with mobile technology that you feel like may have a significant impact on the business, right? Like, there seems like there's, the new barometer or NFC. Are those things marginal? Do they matter? Are there new sensors or technologies on the horizon that you guys think a lot about?
I can start with one. I mean, I definitely think that there's an interesting kind of scenario being played out right now where we have Android and we have iOS and then we have mobile web and a whole bunch of mobile web technologies all playing out in the same mobile space. And I think that as far as mobile app development, I'm very curious to see kind of how that whole world shakes out a few years from now, because I think that the kinds of experiences that you have with users who are using apps, for example, on devices, are somewhat different from the kinds of experience that you have when you're just going to a mobile web page. And I'm not sure how it's going to play out, but that's going to be very interesting to stay kind of abreast on and see what happens.
Do you guys have any comments on the future of mobile? Any deep insights into where Uber's going? Where's Uber going?
I don't know. I think we welcome whatever it is, right? Like Apple Pay came out, and then it was, let's integrate with them, and we just did our Spotify integration, and so, whatever it is, if it makes sense, a lot of it feels very sci-fi-ish now, of like, self-driving cars or drones or whatever it is, but if it happens, we'll adapt and we'll figure out a way to make it work.
Yeah, but you feel like on the consumer side, we're in the mature part of the mobile revolution. That sounds a little bit silly to say, but are we there 8 or 9 years in?
I don't know.
Yeah, hard to know.
I don't know.
Cool. So switching gears a little bit, we talked a little bit about mobile. I want to talk a little bit about the economics and the dynamics of these marketplaces that you all are participating in. And I mean, I think an interesting question that comes up, you guys are these platforms, all of you are these platforms, and you make decisions every day about who gets to participate, how they get to participate, what's okay, what's not okay. And I imagine that's very challenging. Could you speak a little bit to how you talk internally about rules and transparency and participation?
Sure. I mean, we don't make those decisions. The whole mission and vision of Indiegogo is to not be the gatekeeper. We don't want to replace a traditional gatekeeper model, if you will, with ourselves becoming one. So what we do have is we have a baseline, essentially fraud detection, right? Systems in place, both algorithmic as well as manual. And I'm not at liberty to talk about how they work. Obviously, it's a sensitive topic. But past that kind of base level of, are you even who you claim to be, right? We really believe that it's an open market, and in order to innovate and in order to change the world, oftentimes you have to be a little bit crazy, and it's finding that right balance between just a little bit crazy versus completely bonkers that differentiates an awesome innovator versus just a crazy person. And so we let the market decide. Yeah.
So you guys are as open as you can possibly be.
Yep.
I think Uber, if I understand correctly, is really focused on quality and making sure quality is high and making sure that everybody participating is a good actor. Is that fair to say? Is that how you guys look at it?
Yeah, I think, look, we have a double-sided marketplace, so it just means we have two sets of customers that we have to hone in on, and so quality is important, but I don't know, it's such a fine balance of, I mean, when we go into a new city and design the pricing, it's how low can we get the price for the consumer, but where is that breaking point where the partner will make the most amount of money because they'll do the most amount of trips per hour. So it's a really fragile balance, and then you have to take quality into account, and so there's a lot of people to make happy.
Have you guys changed that over time? I mean, I know in the past drivers have said, "Hey, we got kicked off, and I think I'm pretty good."
Change what?
Have you turned the knob in terms of, like, I think a lot in terms of driver quality, but I mean, you bring up another good point in terms of price and getting that balance right.
Have we changed?
Like, obviously, consumers want the product infinitely cheap, right? And drivers want to make as much money as possible. Like,
yeah, we've tweaked it over time, but there's just such a sweet spot where it's, you know, luckily for us, the cheaper we go, the more trips per hour they do, and they make more money.
Yeah.
And we've tested that profusely. So, so it's just finding that sweet spot, and I think, and maximizing it for both parties.
How do you communicate that? Like, how do you communicate to your drivers? I know I love talking to your drivers, right? They can tell you so much about the business, and I think about it. Like, one piece of feedback I've gotten from them is like, use the different networks because they use multiples. Sure. They're like, oh, I like these guys because they give me this information, or these guys pay me here. Like, how do you communicate with them to make sure that they just feel good about it, independent of like the...
In terms of price, or just generally?
Just generally.
Just generally, you know, we have office hours for them to come in. We don't always do it perfectly. I think they are an important customer for us, and we have so many, so it's hard to do this perfectly. But you know, we try and engage with them on as many forums as possible, and we try and, when we educate them on how it works, and you know, right now there's a bunch of them coming into an office and just asking questions, or they give a lot of feedback or advice, and so yeah, it's a hard one.
Yeah.
So
I think this question actually came out of a discussion we had over email about how Waze thinks about this. I think it's a little bit less obvious, this sort of notion of participation in Waze. How do you guys look at it? How do you think about it?
So, I mean, it's, you know, the way that we collect our traffic data is we ping your GPS chip once per second, which explains why your battery dies pretty quickly when you use Waze, and we're working on it. We're sorry about that. But we, obviously, every driver that we have that downloads this product, we are now then in that country, thanks to you. And the map is a little bit stronger. Even if you drive with the app open, but, you know, passively in the background, you're still confirming for us that a road is open and that the speed is 5 miles an hour or 40. And so we want as many users as possible. What I think is interesting is we've done a good job of building in algorithms to make sure that people can't game the system, that they can't undo each other's work. And so, you know, the question that I get a lot is, you know, what do you do to prevent someone from erasing the Bay Bridge or from going in and having some sort of, you know, malintent with the product? And we did a really nice job early on in the process of weighting different users. And so if you use our product constantly and you've been editing for years and you have millions of edits, we're going to trust when you say that there's an accident on the road. Whereas if you download it today and, you know, you put some information in there, you're going to be weighted lower in the process. And so, you know, periodically we have to kick out a user or two, but it's really never been an issue. And I think what's amazing is, you know, we're in almost 200 countries around the world, and people really are inherently good. I mean, you know, their traffic is a universal problem, and so when you have a solution that works as well as ours does, they really do want to help each other and help build out the product.
So it seems like I think most, you probably see this in your platforms, most people participating are great actors. They're well-intentioned. They do great work. You have great drivers 99.99% of the time. Most of your people raising funds are well-intentioned and so on, but certainly things go wrong, right? How do you think about the responsibility of the platforms when users are depending on information that was wrong, or they have a bad ride, or the thing that they funded, it turns out it was hard to make and it doesn't get done? Like, how do you communicate to your users? How do you think about minimizing that versus empowering people to create?
Sure.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Waze makes it very easy for you to report if there is an issue with the map, whether a road is open or closed, or if we route you the wrong way down the street. It's one click, so you can let us know that. I think, you know, the PR person in me, when you think about these types of companies, I think it's hard to say, you know, we connect one platform with another platform, and we have no responsibility on the outcome, right? Like, yes, we're peer-to-peer, but at some point we have to stand behind our product and say, we'll be there for you in case something goes wrong.
Yeah, I want to say I've seen a disclaimer that's like, hey, but actually look at the road, don't just like
Right.
drive. Do you have people driving off the side of the road?
We've been okay so far, but we're good. But you know, I think whether you're, you know, I used to be with Groupon, whether you're with Groupon or Uber or whomever it is, I mean, people need to have some sort of confidence in your product that you will be there if something goes wrong, even if it isn't necessarily directly your fault. And so with Waze, it's a little bit different because we're not physically delivering a product, but I think the same principles apply, that you want consumers to really easily be able to give you feedback and feel like they're heard. And we also have a mechanism built in where if you do report that an accident or direction was bad, everyone else on the road thanks you when they see that, and so you get points back, and you also get thanked by the community. You'll get an email to help fix the map. And so that little bit of validation of you engaging with the company, I think, is what keeps people doing it.
So I'm curious, because people talk about gamification a lot. We see a lot of startups that are like, oh, we're just going to add gamification, and it's all going to be good, right? And you're like, well, call me, and let's look at the data when you get there. Like, do you guys think about it as gamification? Do you like how do you look at that dynamic?
Yeah, I mean, that's how Waze grew in a lot of our earlier countries. We would put things like cherries in the road or happy faces and have you drive over them, and you'd get points. And most people don't even notice that that's there anymore, but my dad still texts me when he hits a new level and gets like a sword or a shield. It's like a very big day in the Mossler household. So, you know, for us recently, when the World Cup was going on, we put soccer balls all over the map in countries that we thought would be the most into the competition, and usership was the highest it had been in a really long time. So there's still something there about having a little bit of fun in the car without it being distracting.
I mean, do you think there's a reason why gamification goes so horribly wrong in so many apps? Like, it just doesn't work most of the time.
I think you can't force it. And in our case, you know, we have to be really careful because we don't want you looking at the screen. But these are things that we do to hopefully engage with other passengers in the car. And I think anytime something is forced, whether it's a marketing campaign or forcing a user to do something that is not naturally in the way they would engage with your product, it's just never, it doesn't feel right. It's never going to work out.
Yeah, if you don't bolt it on, it's got to be built in. So I'm curious, as with Uber, right? Like, you guys clearly do a lot up front to make sure that drivers are good and your ongoing tracking reputation. Like, is that really as good as it gets to avoid as many problems as possible? You do a lot of upfront stuff and you track reputation, or how do you guys operate internally?
Yeah, I think we do so much up front, and then that's where the rating system becomes really powerful as well, where you know, we have so much data on exactly how these rides went, every piece of bad feedback given on a driver, where we can either help them get better, or, you know, if they're below a certain rating or do something that's pretty zero tolerance, they're off. And so not only is the barrier to getting on the system, you know, you need a background check, insurance, et cetera, and also to pass certain tests, et cetera. But you know, then we can easily track if they're not up to par, right? And so I think it is just the volume of trips we're doing. It's never gonna. We can't just create a utopia on the road, but we can. I do think we're making it very safe.
Is there? I mean, I know you guys. It's really competitive for drivers at this point. You guys worry a lot about driver acquisition and retention. Is there a lot you can do in terms of helping them get better? Or is it just sort of like, well, you end up with good people and bad people, and the real task is figuring out which is which?
You know, like if they don't pass a barrier of knowledge of the city, we'll encourage them to go out and study the city. There's actually been some partners who have created like an offshoot of the business where it's like, if you get rejected from being an Uber driver, come here and we'll train you to pass.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Do you refer drivers out there? You
No.
didn't make the cut, but come back.
No. It's something that we kind of found out they don't sign.
Yeah, that's super
That's
interesting.
what you got to do.
Yeah, and you guys are kind of, you're like, okay.
We're just hands off.
Yeah, don't ask, don't tell. So I think you guys have the hardest problem here, right? Like, it's so hard. People go in with these intentions, and it, like, we see this with startups independent of crowdfunding, right? It turns out to be really hard to make stuff in China. How do you guys think about this up front? Do you educate your, you're like, that's a great idea, let's help you see what reality looks like? How do you help your creators?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is to build trust on a platform. Trust is definitely paramount, and that's our biggest focus. One of our biggest focuses on the platform is to do that, and we do that through creating transparency and through creating user education. In a way, we are not the main experts in different areas in which folks crowdfund projects, but what we can do and what we should do is we should encourage communication between the campaigners and the funders, and we provide a bunch of tools for that type of communication. There is campaign updates, there is messages to campaigners, etc., etc. There is a whole dialogue that we try to facilitate and encourage between the both sides of the equation, if you will. And then on top of that, trying to leverage concepts such as, it's in a free market, you have social validation. There's definitely something to be said for crowdfunding projects. People tend to put some value in the fact that, hey, this project is gaining momentum. So we have an algorithm called Gogo Factor, which basically tries to identify projects that are gaining the most momentum and kind of bubble them up to the top to highlight them to different users. Leveraging other features, social networks, right? You might not be a domain expert in something, but if you see that, hey, your Facebook friend contributed to this campaign on Indiegogo, and they actually know a lot about the subject matter, you might be more comfortable, making the leap as well. But in the end of the day, it's about education, it's about transparency, it's about giving the users the information and the understanding that, hey, this is not a store, you're not buying a pre-made product, right? You're, like I mentioned earlier, you're essentially kind of like a VC, you're making a bet on a new idea that might be a great idea and you believe in it, but there are real implementation challenges along the way. And we kind of view our role is to provide the most possible transparent context for the contributors to make their funding decisions with, and then at the end of the day, the decision is still theirs.
Do you feel like you guys have a role in terms of helping make the average project more successful? Is it just sort of like, hey, our role is to set up a transaction between consenting adults here, and if it works, great, and if it doesn't, we did our part?
We definitely partner up with a lot of campaigns that run on our platform. We basically try to share with them, best practices. We've been in this space for 6 years now. We invented the crowdfunding space. Indiegogo was the first crowdfunding company out there. I think the term didn't exist before Indiegogo. And so, we have tools on a campaigner side also, such as, we have run books and the type of things such as, hey, if your campaign is actually successful and it's taking off, it's a really good idea to keep in close communication with your funders, to give them constant feedback. And we encourage our campaigners to, kind of report on their progress and to be very communicative and transparent with the funders, etc. And that helps them to become a more successful campaign. That also helps the funders to again get more information to make their decisions with.
Great. So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about early stage startups. You guys all have very mature businesses. The flywheel is spinning, and you're very much working about making it grow. But I think it'd be helpful to talk a little bit about how we get started, right? Like how you build these businesses and bootstrap them. Could you guys speak a little bit to what it looks like to build these businesses at the beginning? I know you were an Uber employee very early. You were presumably there very early.
I actually joined fairly recently. I joined this summer. So
maybe you can speculate, or maybe you can pass on stories secondhand. So how do you get started? How do you build this community? Do you maybe want to start there?
Yeah, I mean, anytime I've seen anyone build a community, they don't try to attack an entire country at once or the whole world. They focus on a city or a market, and they connect those people there. So I think that, working through influencers, social media obviously is the best free tool there is for letting people know that you exist and what you do. And I think putting as much content as you can out there making sure that it's really easy for people to understand what you do, how you work, and who you are as a company. So that's everything from a website to your social media channels to a blog, and getting that out there with the right folks, which so much of this you can do for free and online. But if you really keep your focus smaller and you say, we're going to launch this in DC or SF, and our goal is to have a really hardy community there, then you can take a few folks who really understand your product, and maybe they have a network back in Chicago or New York or wherever it may be, and that tends to be a good way to start because it's a little more easy to attack when it's a smaller bite, in my experience.
So start small, be focused, reach out to a specific community.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I use Groupon as an example. I was there very early, and we launched in Chicago with this idea that you needed 400 people in order to get a discount on pizza. And that doesn't sound like the beginning of a solid business, but it was because we focused on Chicago. And the next thing you knew, we circulated it with our friends and then our parents and their friends. And so just in Chicago alone, we're signing up some of the best restaurants in the city, and then we're moving outside of food to leisure activities and eventually dental cleaning and anything else you can think of that you can put a discount on. But the point is we didn't open up as a group marketplace for every single industry that was available. We started on one thing, we did that well, and then we expanded. And then once we understood how to work with merchants, we moved to DC and then Boston and so on.
How big was Groupon before you left Chicago?
User-wise?
Users, revenue, however you guys sort of think about. What was the critical mass?
We had some decent, a small amount of funding, but we had maybe several thousand users and moved to the East Coast. And the East Coast, it exploded enough to the point where we started inspiring copycats. And once you see that, it's like, okay, need some more money, need to move faster, and moved overseas.
How did you know it was working? Like, were you looking at repeat purchase rates or referral rates? Like, what is... I think this is a challenge that we see with a lot of our startups. They come in and they give us numbers and they don't know what good looks like.
Right.
What made you guys go, holy crap, this is working, let's go and scale it?
Our definition of good changed over time. At first, people were spending money on our site and we were, becoming profitable, and that's a good thing. But to the point you were making, we have 2 clients. So we had consumers, and then we also had small business owners. And so as a company, it's not working if the business owners aren't succeeding too. And so we built out an entire merchant services team, and then we just became a totally different company. But the first indication it was working is that people knew our name, and we were on social media, and people were spending money on the site. It's pretty obvious,
I'm curious for Uber. I think I know a little bit of the story, but what's your, you probably have a better perspective.
On
like, how did you get started? Like, what was the strategy? Was it like, we're just like, I don't know, we just put some cars on the road and told our friends, or was it a much more proactive, conscious strategy?
Well, I think the first thing is don't. Look, I have one experience I'm speaking to, but I think when Travis and Garrett thought of this, it was like they weren't just trying to get the next, $1 billion idea. It was, this is so broken. And so I think the first thing is like solving something that is really broken, and not just, creating ideas for creating ideas' sake, but
from a bottoms-up perspective, like I can't get a freaking cab, as opposed to transportation like, as an industry is totally fucked.
Yeah, it was. I mean, Garrett.
Both those things are true, I think.
Yes. Yeah. Garrett and Travis both were like, they would use it. They needed, it was just like, hey, I cannot get from, cab's a unicorn in this city, or it used to be. And so, first thing first is create some value that people really need. And, we tested it out, and people were, like, initially it was only thought to be for, our friends and, well, Travis's friends, and when we were just the black car product. And then we suddenly saw people using it that we didn't know, right? So it just kind of took off in a way where it's like, oh, we're actually solving a really big problem that we didn't even know how big this problem was. And so that's what I would say is the first thing is make sure, test the product and see.
And the model really evolved, right? Like my understanding was Garrett actually purchased cars at the beginning.
That was the original idea, is to buy a fleet. And then, that doesn't really scale, so.
Yeah. So you don't have to have perfect ideas at the beginning, right?
No, it's just like what's broken. The big takeaway from that idea is push a car, get a button. The how was all sorts of wrong, but like we got there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you know the Indiegogo origin story?
I mean, I know the story. I probably am not the best suited to tell the whole story, but I'll echo what you said about focus on something that's broken. Indiegogo got started by our founders, Dene, Eric, Slava. They were trying to raise money for films, and it was impossible. And they basically realized access to capital is broken. I think they also believed both bottoms up and tops down. And how do we fix it? How do we remove this gatekeeper element? And I think the other thing that you said that really echoed with me is I think stranger validation is actually really key because I'll actually go as far as say, hey, if you have a product that you're considering launching, try crowdfunding. That might work as a validation vehicle because when you tell your ideas to your friends and families, of course they'll smile and nod and tell you they're great ideas. When strangers on the internet are willing to put their money on the line behind your idea, that's real market validation in terms of target demographic, in terms of the social momentum behind it. We actually had campaigns on our platform that tried to get traditional capital. They were basically rejected, and they went on crowdfunding and Indiegogo. They were successful, and then they came back, and from that they built out a whole business on top of that. And then also, what also you said as far as willing to pivot, I've never heard of a startup that nailed the exact business model from day one. I think it's always iteration.
Yeah, just to pick on a personal pet peeve, I think Uber's a great example of a pivot, right? You're like, we solved the problem, and then we figured out that model wasn't scalable. We figured out a different way to solve the exact same problem, right? So we swapped out the implementation, but we solved the same problem. You hear a lot of people say, oh, that didn't work, so we just started a different company, and we called it a pivot, right? Don't do that. I'd also just reiterate the point you made about, like, hey, getting a project funded is a great way to get validation. We think actually crowdfunding is it's one data point, right? We don't fund anything that gets $1 million in crowdfunding, but it's certainly an interesting data point. We've been successful there in a couple places. So if we're not smart enough as VCs to understand what you're doing, that is a great way to go and really prove it out, or at least prove some demand. So on the subject of startups, I'd be really curious. You guys are all plugged in the Valley. You see a lot of stuff. What are the startups that you're really interested in, right? Who's doing super interesting sharing economy stuff out there that you're like, man, like if I weren't busy doing what I'm doing now, that's what I'd want to be doing, or those are the folks I'd want to be working with?
Yeah, it's easy for me. I'm actually really passionate about crowdfunding, in case you can tell, but if it's not that, and that's just totally personal bias, anything to do with music. So Spotify, SoundCloud, any new thing that has that can help folks discover and promote new musicians.
Is there somebody doing really interesting peer-to-peer music stuff, or do the labels still win?
I think that right now I believe that we are in a state where labels historically have won, and right now labels are not doing so hot, and that dynamic is changing, but I don't know if we've established kind of like the next...
Yeah, the bar for winning may be lower these days for them, but what do you guys think?
I don't know if you'd consider Airbnb a startup, but talk about just totally upending an economy and making value out of something that's not being used. Much in the way, Uber has attacked different markets. It's pretty incredible to see, and they have a long fight ahead of them, and I think cities, governments are so slow to react to stuff because of all the layers that they have that I don't think we've yet seen the true potential, or really where the business is going to net out, because as it's illegal in some places to still do that. But there's a big enough market where not just Airbnb will win, and there's so many different types of housing, and I think it's fascinating. It's going to continue to grow and change. And
do you think Airbnb? You build a brand, and there's things that are encompassed within it and things that are outside of it. Is there part of that market where just Airbnb, because of the way they're positioned or their brand, there's shared housing or renting, things that they're not going to be able to do? Is there room for somebody else there?
I mean, I think so. I think, anytime you have a niche, a certain type of consumer is going to be drawn to you, whether it's upscale vacation rentals or more kind of mobile home things on the go that are a little crunchier that, maybe people in San Francisco would enjoy. I don't know. I don't really
there's
know.
couch surfing and VBRO and a lot of these other ones. Does Airbnb just encompass all of that? Or is couch surfing still a good idea?
I think a lot of that depends on PR too, because nothing can change, someone's buying behavior more than hearing a couple bad stories about what's going to happen. And so, especially when it comes to where you're laying your head at night, that's a pretty important decision to make. And so I do think there's an opportunity to be the high-end vacation rental site or whatever it may be,
So it seems like Uber is on a path to take over the world. There seems to be a lot to do there, but if there weren't, what do you think's interesting?
I don't know. I don't know. I do think Airbnb's probably who I feel like the company I feel closest to. I think we go through a lot of similar reg issues, and and I love what they're doing. So yeah, they're probably.
I'm curious for you, this completely taking this question a different way, but they seem to have a lot of the same issues, and they seem to not get the flack that you guys get, right? Like you guys are kind of known as like going in there and really being a bull in a china shop, and for whatever reason they seem to do the same things and get a lot gentler treatment from the press. Do you have a sense of why that is, or can you just comment on it?
I don't know. I think
it's not.
I don't know. We don't always do well with the press, but
for what it's worth, I think you guys get some unfair treatment. So I don't know.
Yeah, sure. I don't know. I think we do have different approaches, and I think we're not exactly the same, and so I think we have to a little bit. I mean, we're fighting different battles. So yeah, we take a very aggressive approach.
Cool. I want to ask one more question and then have the audience ask questions. So get your questions ready. I'm sure you have some interesting ones. We've talked about like who's doing cool stuff. I'm curious if you see any areas where you're just like, that's an obvious opportunity. There should be Uber for X or Indiegogo for X. Or what aren't people doing? What are the opportunities 500 startups should be looking for? Folks in this audience who are looking to go solve a problem. Where are the problems that aren't being solved?
I don't know if this is sharing economy specific. I'm just going to go off my list of things.
Yeah. What pisses you off about
the
world?
No, I think the two areas I think are just nightmares right now is one is healthcare. I think there's so much there. I think it's just a total disaster, and then the other would be schools. Like those are the two that I would probably say are really broken, and it would be very overwhelming to go after either of those. I've had a lot of friends try to go into healthcare and fixing it and fail. Because it's so institutionalized, but so are a lot of these areas.
Well, as we talk about utilization, right, as a problem about being peer-to-peer and about utilizing skill sets, do you feel like those are areas where that same pattern applies? Like, does utilization and optimization apply to healthcare, or maybe you don't know as a domain expert?
Well, that's where it may not line up with peer-to-peer. I'm just giving you a laundry list of things I'd like you guys all to fix.
Get on that.
I think One Medical went a step in the right direction, and maybe there's more to it on the on-demand piece. Maybe not. I'm not.
I mean, for what it's worth, actually, we talked to a really interesting company that's doing Uber for veterinarians, and that turns out to be a really messed up market. And so, maybe a little bit easier than humans, but an interesting business.
Totally selfish, but I think the music or the live event experience is completely messed up because there's a lot of people who have addressed either extra inventory with tickets or they're doing mobile redemption. I'm not sure why I can't go to a venue and do this entire thing by phone. I want to give them my ticket through my phone. I want to buy a t-shirt through my phone. I want to connect with other people who are in the same room and share photos, and even if I don't know them, I don't care. The experience of going to a music festival is difficult, even though we see these great, open networks where it shouldn't be so hard. And I just don't think it's been married together in one place. And I actually think it would drive a huge amount of revenue for the, locations where they have these concerts, but also for the bands and anybody else who has a cut.
Is that a discovery problem or just purely a transactional friction problem? Because I just don't know when the bands that I love are coming to town, and then I don't go.
Well, and that too. I think it doesn't live in one place, and there's so many mixed interests that no one really wants to step forward and say they're going to solve it. And Ticketmaster had a partnership where they were using these, redeeming your ticket on your phone, which is great, but that's only one piece of what I expect now because I'm a mobile consumer. Mm-hmm. And I get these experiences where if I use Uber, I'm taken care of from beginning to end, or Airbnb, I can manage my entire reservation on my phone, so why is this part hard? Yeah. And it just seems like there's so much money left on the table, I don't know. Yeah.
I'd just like to tweak the question for you, which is, what is the coolest thing you guys have funded? What's the coolest that you're that's going to be a cool startup?
I'm going to have to say solar roadways. I don't know if you guys heard of it. There's this campaign this summer. It's basically a couple who've been working on this technology to pave roads with solar panels, of all things. Oh, cool, and, they've been working on this for a better part of 10 years. And everybody thought that they were kind of crazy, but they went on Indiegogo and they raised over $2 million. They've since gone to the White House, to the Maker Faire. They got a lot of press, a lot of exposure. They have investors lining up now, and they're actually piloting their project. They are paving a part of their hometown into solar panels as a test drive. So I just think that's a kind of stuff straight out of the sci-fi book, and that's changing the world right there.
Yeah, that's super cool. All right, I'd love to open the floor to you guys for questions. It's hard to see you, but feel free to come up if you want to come up, or if you're close enough, you can kind of holler at us, just kind of raise your hand. And as a reminder, we have the companies that presented earlier, so if you'd love to know more about the Hong Kong protests or delivery or storage utilization, please feel free to ask them as well. Does anybody have questions? Yeah. So the question was, who gets to see what information, specifically with Uber? What does the driver get to see? What does the passenger get to see?
So what the driver gets to see, neither the driver so the client sees the driver rating, right, on when they're coming. After you take a trip, they do not see the rating you're giving them, and vice versa. It's something we aggregate to determine quality. So if a driver rates you a 1, might we reach out to see if you were really rude or threw up in the car or whatnot? Yes. So it's is it something we could expose? Maybe, and we've thought about it, but for now, I think it's less. People were really scared of getting the same driver again, and they saw that you gave them a bad rating, and so we're not trying to necessarily create that kind of behavior as much as just have a very good gauge of quality and be able to do the best customer support possible after a trip.
So there was a trade-off there between transparency and, this is awkward and creates friction. So
yeah, I think at one point we did share them, and people just got so focused on it when really it should just be a good gauge for us to make sure we have the right people on the system on both sides.
Yeah, it was super fun when there was a bug in the website and I got to go see my rating at one point. I got a 5. I got a good rating. Any other questions? Yeah, over there.
Thank you. I was quite interested in the comment made about the difficult time that Uber gets in the media, and I guess my question is that in the past, Uber has been a small, plucky bull in a china shop, and people kind of enjoy that. And now Uber, of course, is a big company. and that brings with it very different responsibilities in terms of public policy, in terms of market communication. And I'm just wondering, does Uber get that, and will Uber be changing something about its approach?
Fair question.
Do you embrace that? I mean,
look,
get it, but also embrace it.
I think where it's a growing pain. Like we still operate like a startup. We operate as though it's like the 10 of us again, when it's like, no, there's 2,000 of us. So I think it's we have some growing pains. We're just trying to deal with how do you operate as a bigger company, because part of us being just so scrappy is how we've expanded so quickly, and how we've grown so quickly in each of these cities and added so many different products. And so it's a balance that we haven't gotten perfectly, and we're definitely aware of it, and we're trying. And but it's certainly an area for growth.
So I don't know if you can answer this, but is David Plouffe's job to help you think about things differently, or to help the world think about you doing the same thing differently? Does that make sense?
Yeah, both.
Is he mortified? Is he like, oh my God?
Both. No, he's fantastic. He's. I think. He's touching policy and communication. So, where are we broken? Where do we need to fix? What do we need to do to get there? And communications and policy. Policy in itself is, regulatory battles we have for days.
Yeah, we'll have to get him in here and ask him if it's harder to do Uber or a political campaign. Great. Any other questions? Maybe over from this side of the house. What are you guys dying to know? You're ready for lunch? All right, cool. Well, we've got a couple more minutes, but maybe we'll just we'll end it here and go let you guys have some lunch, and you can talk to us afterwards. So please join me in thanking our speakers and also our presenters earlier.